Well, this is history. I think it was last year in Pittsburgh, I walked on the Borscht floor and I says, I need you and your mentor to come together, correct?
That's right.
Assuming the fact that he has your baby pictures, correct?
Yes.
As we'll see here. I can't say enough because this has really been the big one that I've worked on. As Mary knows, Sid's wife back there, I've been hitting up Sid, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it, and the little thing, but finally we got Fred Weinberger, who's known Sid for 50 years,
Almost.
come to his house, to mentor together. What an opportunity. Fred Weinberg, Sid Kass. Thank you.
Thank you. Sid, would you like to start and talk about the very early days?
I think what we should start here is what we collected in the olden days. I'm going back probably 45, 50 years ago. I was a little bit taller and a little heavier, but I was able to wear one of these neckties to one of our aeroramas in Southern California, but I'll mention those a little later. But was one of our collectors and a member that had a company that made the neckties. And every year during the aerorama in Southern California, regardless of where it was in Southern California, he furnished neckties for everyone present. And I didn't have any of them available right now to show you, but anyway, I conned him into making them for our local club as well. Every year when we had our coin show, he would furnish neckties for me, and we had separate ties, a blue one, every year it was blue for the dealer, and a brown one, or tan, or whatever color you want, some shade of brown anyway, for the members. And for the women, he had scarves. The women wore the scarves, and it had the club emblem on it and all that. He did a real nice job. Matter of fact, his collection sold, well, Fred was telling me it was 10 or 15 years ago. I didn't think it was that long ago. His name was Milt Cohen of New York, and his collection sold for several $1 million. But anyway, what we collected way back then, we didn't know too much about errors, what caused them, how they happened, or whatever. But there was one fellow in the club, Mort Goodman. He broke the ice, I believe. Is that correct, Fred? Mort had a display. He had connections with Eva Adams, who was director of the Mint at that time. How he ever broke the ice with Eva Adams, I don't know. But he got started. He made a display, traveled all over the United States. Every club that he was able to make contact with, he would show these items of the Mint errors. How I got started, I collected a few errors. Most of them were 57D pennies because they were the most items available. I entered them in a display for our local coin club, got a third prize without even knowing what I was doing. So I thought, if I got third with that bit of junk, I can do a lot better. So I kept working on it, traveled all over up and down the state of California, going in the automobile. The car was always going uphill with my displays in the trunk. But finally I got some nice awards, and I displayed them at the aeroramas in Southern California as well. But what they were mostly was minor errors, which today, if you would get 75 cents for a roll of them, you'd be lucky. I don't know if you could even get 75 cents other than the fact that they were wheat cents. And then anyway, we had the Star Rare Coin Encyclopedia. This is an old issue, and I made contact with this company as well as some of the other clubs. There was the biggest item, I think, was BIE cents, a die break in the word liberty. That's what everybody was collecting, that, or there was a club had a BIE newsletter. It was a monthly publication. Had a note here, a note to Sid. Oh, he says, speaking of die breaks and the word liberty, and then send in, well, don't want to read all that. Not that important, what he said. But anyway, somehow or other, there were collectors of die breaks from the head to the rim. They call it the spiked head. There was a book on that. Jean Cohen, also of New York, or Florida rather, Florida, she put out the book on the spiked heads. Those were some of the common errors. Matter of fact, I did a column for Error Trends Coin magazine with just the trends, a monthly publication with trends from the BIE cents. Now you can imagine having that in a publication today, BIE cents. Hey, somebody must be a nut collecting those things. But there's probably still people out there collecting them, I don't know. But then, as I said, each year, as we had our, well, first we had the error club, the National Error Club called CONE, C-O-N-E. Somehow or other, I became a member and an officer. I was on the board of directors of CONE, and that was back in the probably mid-60s, 1960s probably. And then dissension in the group formed another club called NECA, Numismatic Error Collectors of America. I got on that board of directors somehow or other. I don't know how, but I did. Now I'm on the board of both clubs. There's dissension, and I was, I was having surgery about time the two clubs joined, and I decided not to become a member of either of the new club. Or I was a member, but not on the board. I didn't want to run for an office. Yeah, I had enough problems of my own. So I didn't run for office, but the club did get started. Then the two clubs joined, and they're going great today. No Lee Gong, Bill Fiva, he was president at the time, and first person I ran into, John Wilson over here. I didn't spot him earlier today. Glad to see you too. But a lot of you have seen me. I've seen you in the past. Hey, I'm glad to be here and be able to talk a little bit about it. And I'll let Fred say something here. And I've got all these different magazine publications, Error Scope from 1969, and you can't believe this picture of Fred Weinberg. This picture of Fred Weinberg, his hair is longer than my daughter's. But anyway, Fred, I didn't show you that picture.
I think I have that copy.
Now tell the story.
Well, this is from the publication, the NECA Error Scope of August and September of 1972. Going back a ways, I mentioned earlier about the error-ramas we had in Southern California. It seemed like Southern California was loaded with error clubs, and each year the groups got together. We had one big convention, not as large as the ANA convention, but in 1967, it's going back a few years, it was in Hollywood, California. 1968 was in Hollywood again, at the Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel. Club. 1970, the Los Angeles Sportsman's Lodge. And at one time, maybe Fred will tell you something about this one, because this one was in 1971 at Studio City, and somehow or other...
You're not going to be able to get a close-up of that, are you? Oh, yeah.
Fred was hypnotized. So he'll have to maybe tell you something about that, being hypnotized in 1971. I don't know if he's changed since then or not. Then in 1972 was in San Diego, and also when I was on the board of directors, one of my jobs was I was the treasurer, and I was in charge of the youth group. And I think when I first started the youth group, Lee Gong was Lee was in the service, the Navy, stationed in Washington, D.C., right, Lee? And I contacted Lee way back then. Lee was just a kid then. But anyway, old enough to be in the Navy. But anyway, he was on one of my groups. And what I had to do as a youth director was when one of these youths joined, they'd have to list the items that they collected or their interests. Now I take those lists and group them together by common interest, and I put that person, that new member, in contact with other members with similar and like interests. And that's the way that got started. Then somehow or other, I roped Fred into helping me. The next thing I know, Fred was doing it.
I was a youth at that time.
Yeah, Fred was just a kid too. But I roped him into helping me, and I shoved everything off onto him. So anyway, Fred, you want to mention something right now?
Well, thanks. And I mean, when I started, a lot of the things that Sid had discussed had already been in place as far as some of the clubs. And I got interested in error coins when I was 12 years old in 1962. And the very first error coin that I actually purchased, as opposed to find in circulation, was a 1941 nickel that somebody had pressed a penny up against, and I thought it was an error, and I paid, I think, about $4 for it. And it took me about 2 years to figure out that it was a man-made sandwich item, but that's what motivated me to learn. I mean, we all make mistakes, and sometimes the first mistake you make is the one that motivates you to find out more about whatever subject that you're interested in. And I quickly found NECA, and I joined, I believe in 1965. I was 15 years old at the time. And I met, through the mail only, Sid Kass, Arnie Margolis, Mort Goodman, who really is one of the forgotten pioneers and very influential people in the air hobby. I lived up in Hollywood at the time. And by 1967, Mort had started the Air Club of Hollywood, which was the very first local club devoted to errors. And that was also the first year that they had an Airorama, which was the national show for NECA, the Numismatic Air Collectors of America. And I met Sid, Mort, Arnie, some incredible people in 1967 at that time. And I've always credited Mort, Sid, and Arnie as being the people that motivated me to get into the coin business and become a full-time coin dealer, and literally drop out of college after 4 years. But that's a whole other story. That's in the 70s. At the time that I started in 1962, 1965, that area, there was very, very little reading material devoted to error coins. Probably the biggest, most popular item would be Jim Johnson's Collector's Clearinghouse column, which was generally, I think at the time, not the last page in the beginning, but it was around the middle or the 2/3 of the issue of Coin World, and it was a full page, and I can remember opening it up each week and finding the Collector's Clearinghouse column and looking at pictures in black and white of an off-center penny, and that was exciting. And it's funny to think today when you can go online and look at a large blown-up full-color photograph of an error coin, or a scan, I should say, and it looks very, very primitive, you know, back then. Alan Herbert, who's here with us today, also wrote columns for Numismatic News on errors, and Alan promoted the hobby. And it was very, very small at the time. It was looked down upon by regular collectors and regular coin dealers, and if you had a rare date error coin, it sold at a discount. People looked at them as defective. The people that collected errors back then in the 60s were a relatively small group of devoted people that liked errors, thought they were unusual, and through the enthusiastic and very hardworking efforts of Mort Goodman, who literally drove around the country in his javelin with displays and diagrams of the minting process. He educated people at local coin shows in small towns and big towns alike, and helped bring awareness to the minting process, because there was no diagrams and charts that showed how planchets were punched and how blanks were upset and how coins were struck and all of the different features that a coin travels from the beginning to the end. And Mort did that. And I think, just like all the books that are published today that help stimulate interest in a particular area, whether it's hobo nickels or shield nickels or any type of particular type of coin, the minting process, by seeing the pictures and having somebody like Mort explain it, made it easier for us to understand in our mind the minting process. And I was always taught by Mort and the people in the people in NECA at the time, to study the minting process and know how a coin is made, because knowledge wasn't that deep at the time, and a lot of people, like today, thought that a coin that might have been acid treated was a genuine coin, or somebody that took a pair of shears to a coin and clipped it could have been a genuine clip. There was really no way, aside from a gut instinct and experience, to tell a genuine clip. However, in the mid-'60s, a gentleman named Blakesley from La Jolla, California, did an incredible study that explained how blanks are punched, how clips occur, and the different signs that you can tell a genuine clip from a fake clip, that everybody today talks about it. And again, he's another unsung hero that's been largely forgotten, except for the fact that the Blakesley effect carries his name, which shows a weakness opposite the clip. But there's also metal flow, which he noticed, and also something that I use quite a lot when I authenticate error coins for PCGS and for myself is what we call cut and tear marks. I don't think, at that stage of my life, I don't know if I was aware of anybody else except for Blakesley that explained how, when a punch comes through the planchet strip, that it's pushed halfway and it's torn the other half. And if you look on the inside of a clip, you should see two different textures. Whereas if a coin is cut with shears, it's going to be a smooth or the same type of texture. So there's three ways to authenticate a clip planchet that no one had ever really thought about or put together. So between people like Blakesley, Mort Goodman, people were doing studies on cuds and different dyes and dye progressions. And as Sid says, BIEs and die cracks were very, very popular for a variety of reasons. Number one, they were affordable because you could cherry pick them at the time. You could find them in circulation and find them in rolls. And to spend some of the money that errors are worth today would have been unheard of back in the 60s and even some of the early 70s. And a lot of coins just didn't exist. A lot of error coins and some of the quantities that we see today didn't exist because the mintage figures in total for the mints were very, very different. I know that in the year 2000, the U.S. Mint made about 28 billion coins. I think the last few years it's been 12 to maybe 15 billion coins. And my recollection is that in the 60s and the 70s, it was maybe a few billion coins. And you just didn't see either some of the dramatic errors that have happened in the 90s and in the last few years, with the exception of the last few years. But in the type coin errors that existed, like the Bolt collection, which I'll talk about for a second, error coins back then, and it's true today, if somebody collected them and they were a serious collector and they found a neat 2-cent piece die cap, as an example, or an off-center Indian head penny, they kept it in their collection. So coins didn't circulate like sometimes they do today. Rarities today show up every few years in an auction or something. Error coins, if you were a serious collector and you bought that coin, you kept that coin in your collection until you either passed away or you got real old and you wanted to sell it for whatever purpose. And so one of my favorite sayings that a rare coin dealer in New York called Lester Merkin, who passed away a few decades ago. He told me back in the 70s, and it's very applicable to error coins, especially today, but something that Lester said was sometimes the opportunity to buy a rare coin is rarer than the coin itself. And if you think about it, that's very, very true. You can have a rare error coin that there's maybe 5 known, but if those 5 coins happen to be in a permanent collection, it could be 20, 30, 40 years before they come out on the market. So a lot of the collectors in the past 20 or 25 years, and a lot of you are sitting here, realize that fact and realize that when a rare coin, a rare error coin happened to show up on the market, it would be aggressively pursued, either in an auction or at a coin show, and that was part of the fun, buying and selling errors for your particular collector interest, and learning the minting process, because again, if you know how a coin is made, you can look at a coin and tell if it was damaged or not. Probably one of the biggest collections of errors that's ever come up on the market was the Bolt collection, Dr. Conway Bolt. This came out in 1974, and Stax had sold his regular collection in 1966. The family, who I believe they were in North Carolina, kept the error coins, probably because it turned out to be a good thing to do, because I don't think they had much value in 1966 to too many people. I was working at a company called Numismatics Limited in Beverly Hills, and Warren Tucker, who had just left Worldwide Coin Ventures in Atlanta, came to a Long Beach show, came to my office with approximately 2,000 major error coins from 1793 to about 1956. And probably a majority, not all, but a large majority of the most spectacular type coin errors that are on the market today or in people's collections today came from that collection. There were half a dozen off-center gold coins. There were deep die-cap Indian head pennies, 2-cent pieces, a unique deep die-cap buffalo nickel reverse, some of the most spectacular error coins in the world. And it was a major commitment that Harry Gordon, who owned Numismatics Limited, allowed me to make that commitment to buy that collection for $60,000 in 1974, which at that time there wasn't a single coin, probably with the exception of a 43 copper penny, that was worth $1,000 or even $500. The few spectacular error coins, maybe dated 1964, 10 years earlier, double-struck Kennedy half or an off-metal Kennedy half, those were maybe a few $100s at the most. So to spend $60,000 for a collection was unheard of and took a lot of nerve, but it turned out that it was a spectacular collection. I had a lot of fun selling it. It took me about a year to market almost all the coins. I made a nice profit for the company, and those coins today carry a very good pedigree. And I actually have one of the brochures from my price list at the time that shows some of those coins. Today, although there may be collections like that around, we don't know. Today, the best collections have been built by serious error collectors over the past 25 or 35 years, and at some point those will come on the market. Heritage has been selling, Heritage Numismatic Auctions in Dallas has been selling for about the last year and a half a collection by a collector named Larry Rausch, which some of us know. Larry specialized in Indian head pennies, seated Liberty dimes and quarters off center, things like that. And he had amassed a very large collection of different dates and percentages off center. And it's taken Heritage, again, about a year and a half through a variety of different auctions to sell his collection. And that's probably been one of the best collections that's come on the market, with the exception of Bill Fiva's collection, which came up 2003, I was going to say about 2 years ago, and that was at the Baltimore A&A. And that was spectacular. And everybody knows Bill Fiva from his Cherry Picker's Guide and his friendly, sure, I'll be happy to take a look at it every time he's at a coin show and tell you what you have. The error hobby has progressed quite a bit from a small group of people who were enthusiastic as far as collecting and trying to study the minting process to an absolute explosion of books, references, diagrams. The Mint has released more information. We know a lot more today how coins are made, and that information not only encourages people, but it gives them the confidence to know that if they're buying a coin, they can go to a reference book and hope that whether it's a die variety or a striking mechanical error, that that coin is listed or at least explained in a catalog or a book so that you know what you have. Everybody wants to know, what is it? How did it happen? And of course, you know, what's it worth? The internet today has been probably the biggest motivation in the enlargement of the error hobby. And I tell people for the last couple of years that having Annex, PCGS, and NGC certify errors and the internet, it's really given a level of confidence that never existed before, because if you were an error collector in the 60s or the 70s or even the early 80s, you either were taking a chance that the coin you were buying was real, just like, you know, if you bought an MS-63 coin, well, was it AU or was it MS-63? It enabled a lot of people who were interested in errors to now say, you know what, if it's in a PCGS or an NGC or an Annex holder, I know that it's real. And that expanded not only the level of confidence to the people, but it made collectors of regular coins very eager, in my observation, to get an error example in a holder also. In other words, if you collected Indian head pennies and everyone wants an MS-66 rad or the highest grade, you know, the registry set people are very influential as far as some of these high grade coins. But there's collectors that would collect an MS-62 or 64, whatever the grade. Well, when you're paying thousands of dollars for a rare date in a high grade, and you show that collector an off-center Buffalo nickel if he collects Buffalo nickels, or an off-center Mercury dime, or whatever, an error coin in that particular series, and it's in a PCGS or an NGC holder because that's what they collect as a regular coin, the wow factor, as I call it, takes over, because they look at it, they go, wow, I've collected Buffalo nickels, but I've never seen an off-center, and it's $500, it's $200, it's $2,000. The price ranges are everywhere. And that's expanded the error market. So there's so many more people that can collect errors today for a variety of reasons, because they're certified, because there's information about the minting process, because there's information that's been published about die varieties. And as people, I think, as some rare coins, Brasher doubloons or 1913 Liberty Head nickels, get into the millions and millions of dollars, people look towards other hobbies or segments of the hobby that they can collect and study. And most people will tell you, and I see this at my table all the time, even if you don't collect errors, you can't help but look at an error coin and go, wow, that's neat. It's one of the few opportunities we have to catch the U.S. government making a mistake that they can't deny. Well, yes, and sometimes they deny it. I mean, to bring a little more up to date, people are talking about the Wisconsin quarters, and a lot of people ask me, what do I think either caused it, or, you know, what does the Mint find out? And I tell them that we know from reading numismatic news and Coin World that there is an investigation in the Denver Mint to try to find out, was this accidental with the high and low leaf, or was it done on purpose? Did somebody drop something on the die, or is it possible that somebody in the die room didn't get his parking spot that day at the Denver Mint, or, you know, and was upset? And I tell people that I'm pretty confident the Mint police investigation will find out what happened. I'm not so confident that they're going to release that information to us. So there's two different issues here. And it's very interesting, but it shows that there's always something, whether it's a three-legged buffalo or a 55 double die or a high or a low leaf. For die varieties, there's always something interesting when it comes to the minting process and errors that are made. So I kind of went over a lot of different subjects, and I didn't spend maybe as much time in the 1960s or the 70s as I thought, but does anybody have any questions? Anybody have any particular questions about either coin dealers or coins at the market at the time that Sid or I could answer?
I was curious, what do you think that your $60,000 collection is worth today?
We've had that conversation a lot of times. The collection that I paid $60,000 for in 1974, and that was the price that was given to me. And what I ended up doing was I sat with someone in my office at the time, ran a tape, and when I got to about 2/3 of the way through the collection, and of what I wanted to pay for coin by coin, and I had far exceeded $60,000, I just stopped and I said, okay, I own the deal. I then marketed the collection, and within 1 year I had sold 99% of the coins for about $150,000, which was a pretty good accomplishment back 20 years ago. We've talked over the last couple of years whenever a single coin comes up, and it's really hard to construct it exactly, but estimates run anywhere from $2 to $4 million today for that collection like that. So it was a lot of fun.
Fred,
Yes.
there's been an increase in exhibiting two of our coins in recent years, about 10 years.
Now, a lot of that, I think, is due. Pardon? Well, the question was that there's been a lot of increase in error coin exhibits over the past decade or so, and actually that goes back about 20 years when some of us pushed to have the ANA finally, I believe in 1977, in Atlanta, recognize the error hobby. That was the first year, if all of these years that we're talking about can be put into perspective. 1977 was the first year that the ANA allowed an error coin category to take place. And since then, there's been anywhere from 2 to 6 or 8 exhibits all the time. I've been told by the ANA they're always some of the most popular exhibits that the public has the most questions about. And the exhibits are able to draw a lot of interest because the exhibitors can now take a lot of information that didn't exist 20 or 30 years ago that are in these reference books and use them and educate the public. I was taught to be a judge. I've been a judge for the ANA since 1977, and apparently I'm pretty tough when it comes to judging. I'm always the toughest one, and I give the lowest points. And my excuse always was, well, I was taught by Mort Goodman, who gave me a set of standards which correspond to the ANA's standards for completeness and information and all of these different things. But I guess I had almost one-on-one training with Mort, and so I'm very, very difficult. Even more tough than Arnie. And Arnie can be a tough judge a lot of times, but I think I have a reputation for being even more discernible. I don't know.
I don't think you are.
Maybe not enough.
You mentioned that there is an exhibit of currency. There are pairs of currency.
Yes, well, yeah, and obviously a lot of the things that we're talking about for coins go with currency too. The error currency market has exploded. There's a great exhibit here at this show in San Francisco on $2 bills, which happens to be a very rare series of currency. And now both PCGS and NGC have been certifying. NGC, I think, since the beginning of the year, and PCGS just the last month or two have been certifying error currency. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens to that market, because I've already seen just in the last month or so existing customers and new people who I had never heard of call me up or email me and ask, do I have PCGS or NGC error currency? So it just widens the base, because it enables dealers to sell to their customers something that, it's like the GIA for diamonds, something that people can feel comfortable about are real errors and not altered or damaged items. Alan?
One of the things you might mention is the mission that started those Eramas back in the 60s, which was that somebody would come into every one of those shows, and it still happens today. Somebody would come in with a coin that nobody could explain.
Well, you're right. In the air hobby, there's always been what I've called, like, just for a short term, I call them stumpers. And it's true, actually. Not only would we see a coin that we knew was real, but we couldn't really explain how it happened, but I also, up until the last few years, from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, I could count on going to any major coin show and buying a one-of-a-kind air that I had never seen before, whether it was a major off-center dollar or a die-cap, some unusual coin. But you're right, the public, because these were advertised and it was just an Erorama back in the 60s and the 70s, somebody would show up with a coin that would stump the experts. And we use the phrase, the coin looks good visually. It smells right. You know it's right by knowing the minting process, but you look at it, and Bill is probably one of the champions, and unfortunately, in finding these things and then trying to stump us with what is it, and you're also probably one of the best in figuring them out too. But there's always, huh? Yeah, you're right. I have to give Tom credit. That's what makes error coin collecting very, very interesting. As much as we know about the minting process, there's always something that shows up that everyone will agree is a genuine mint-made error coin of some type, but we can't figure out how it happens. We see it at every coin show, an Erorama. When I get coins brought into me for PGS, there's always something there that I look at and I say to myself, A, how did it happen? I know it's real. And then, of course, the biggest problem, the immediate problem for me is, how do I describe it in 22 characters and spaces on the tag? People don't realize when you have a Morgan dollar or $20 St. Gaudens, you got a date, you got a mint mark, and you got a grade and maybe a pedigree or something. When it comes to error coins, even much more so than die varieties, the biggest challenge I found the last 6 or 8 years is, how do I condense what this coin looks like into 22 characters and spaces? And it's not easy. It's a draining experience for me because your brain just works overtime. And then, of course, after I do this with the coins, a month or two later, somebody will come up to me with that coin, that PCGS coin, or even an NGC coin, and they go, well, you know what, here's this coin that it's off-center, it's double-struck, it's a flip-over brockage, that's brockage, and it's got a clip, and it was done something else, but you didn't put that on the holder. It's not easy. It's not easy to explain, it's not easy to do, but it's fun, so.
I've got one for you, Fred.
Oh, you got one there? Zan, did you have a question?
I had, for the errors, if you don't collect the ones that are super easy to see visually, a big off-center or double strike, what have you, then I think in the last 10 plus years, the cherry pickers guide has brought more people into the error hobby than I think any other item.
Well,
It's just been amazing. Because you can go hunt it down yourself.
Right. Well, actually, I agree with you 100%, but what's ended up really happening is there's been a dichotomy, a diversion of major error, what we call major, meaning only mechanical, versus die variety collectors. And actually, there's probably, and Bill would probably know better than me, but I would guess there's 20 or 30 or 50 times, if not 100 times, more die variety collectors today than there are error coin collectors, because again, off the top of my head, part of the reason is with the photography techniques that are available, where you can show a big close-up of a double mint mark or a double die, and the Cherry Picker's Guide is obviously the best example. It gives somebody something to look for and to reference when they find something in their change. They can flip to the page and look for it. And of course, the challenge then becomes finding something that's not listed. And Bill will be the first to tell you, the Cherry Picker's Guide can't list every variety. It lists the major varieties, but as an offshoot of that, and an evolution of dye variety collecting and cherry pickers, almost every series now has had books published on misplaced date punches and double mint marks and double dyes. So most denominations, up through Ike dollars, from cents to Ike dollars, there are books that exist now that list double dyes, repunchment marks for each of those series, which didn't exist before.
I think even more important, Fred, is that dye varieties are much easier to find than errors, especially your very visible errors. As you say, every series has a series of varieties on it, and errors are a lot tough to find.
Right, right.
So that's why I think we have more variety collectors.
Right.
I remember years ago, you'd go to a convention, you might find one or two dealers that might have a couple off-center cents in the case. Now, just about every dealer has some sort of error, and everybody's got variety.
Right, right. Well, I mean, you and JT are...
We created a monster.
Yeah, I was going to say, you created probably one of the most, not only influential, but one of the fastest growing segments of numismatics ever. When you came out with that first Cherry Picker's Guide, it was almost like a religious experience, I think, for a lot of collectors to see what's out there and to see some very rare dye varieties, because a lot of people consider that in general, dye varieties are common, and many of them are, probably most of them are, but there are some incredibly dramatic dye varieties that are breathtaking, that are also rare for a variety of reasons, and that, as Bill says, it enables people to go to coin shows or coin shops and look with a magnifying glass and find something, and also discover new varieties that haven't been reported. So that feeds that human desire to discover something new and to be the first to report something that no one's ever seen before.
A short history on how the Cherry Picker's Guide came about. In my time with Nestle, I was in sales with Nestle for 36 years, and one of my areas was St. Louis. And I'd go into Woodside out there in Wisconsin, and he turned me loose in the back vault and say, look around, take whatever you want, and know what to find. And after about 2 years of that, he said, why don't you write down a list for me so I can look for you, and then when you come in, I'll have these for you. He said, better yet, why don't you write a book on it?
Oh, interesting.
I got together with JT, and he was a printer, and that's how the Cherry Picker's Guide.
That's great. And actually, that's an evolution of like what Sid was talking about. Sid was known as the king of 1957 D errors, whether they were the BIE die breaks or the blob letters, and Gene Cohen wrote a book on spiked heads. The genesis of that was there in the 50s and the 60s, and it's interesting thinking about going to some of these error clubs. There was one in Long Island, there was one in San Diego, there was one in Orange County, plus the Error Club of Hollywood, which started in 1967. And we would have the meeting, maybe a couple of the dealers would show a few coins, and the dealers at that time would have maybe a half a dozen or 10 relatively dramatic error coins, but they were very few and far between, and whether they were $50 or $150, and you look back at some of these price lists and you see some of the prices and you cry, but that was a lot of money back in the 60s for a coin that nobody had any respect for, or for a type of coin. But everyone talked about die breaks and different things, and laminations were very, very hot, and cuds obviously were very, very hot. And I happen to think today, for some reason, cuds have lost a lot of their, I don't know if luster is the correct term. Pardon? Glamour. And they've lost their glamour, and I don't understand why, because it involves a major breakage of a die, not just the die crack, but a piece of the die coming out and something very, very dramatic. Maybe it's just because I was raised, with more learning about cuds and everything, and there's plenty of books on cuds, and they still occur. There's 3 states quarters with cuds. There's a 1999 and I think a 2000 cent with the cud. I happen to think that's one of the, if somebody asked me, I would say that's probably one of the underappreciated areas today, and I really can't figure out why. But sometimes interests change, and people discover their own areas that they like to collect. So, Dennis?
Well, tell a little more about some of the pioneers that had Tetris enthusiasm, like Phil Steiner.
Well, yeah, God, there's so many. I mean, we're talking about California, starting just to have a starting point. In the Era Club of Hollywood, I met dealers whose names I think are pretty much forgotten today. Don Katona was a major Era coin dealer. A lot of people have heard of Lonesome John Devine, but I bet you most people don't know how Lonesome John got his nickname. Does anybody know here offhand? Besides Bill? John Devine lived in Newbury Park, which is near Thousand Oaks, California, kind of where I live now. And he had a coin business with a partner named John Burrison. And so they were called John Specialties. At some point, very early 70s, I believe, John Burrison decided he didn't want to be partners. He wanted to get out of the coin business. So John Devine bought him out. And John says, well, I can't call myself John Specialties anymore because there's only one John. And somebody, I don't know who it really was at the time, I don't know if it was his wife Peggy or not, said, well, if you're not John, because John is gone, then you're Lonesome John. And that name stuck, and Lonesome John is, one of the most famous names. And actually, John was here Wednesday at the coin show with his wife. John probably hasn't been to a coin show in 10 or 15 years. He's retired and he drives a motorhome, gold mining and everything. But John was also very influential because he put out some of the best catalogs. He owned a print shop in Newbury Park, and he did very good photography at the time, and he actually printed some of my Numismatics Limited catalogs. So John was important. There was a dealer in Chula Vista, California, near San Diego, named Dow Rice, who bought and sold coins. Dow was killed in a car accident coming home from a coin show, a coin club meeting one night. Phil Steiner and Mike Zimfer were from Indiana, and I know Phil Steiner was, and probably one of their biggest legacies, in addition to a price list, is that they came out with a book of United States coins struck on foreign planchets that was, at the time, probably the most complete reference book on dates, not only dates and denominations of what the U.S. mints, San Francisco, Philadelphia, Denver, struck, but also it listed the diameters, it listed the weights, it listed the compositions, and that's used today. And maybe with the mints exhibit right out here on the floor with some of the ledger books, I don't know if you've seen it, but I spent a couple of hours at this show in the afternoons looking at the Mint's ledger books. They have some incredible information, and we're working with a few different people to possibly eventually, over a period of years, get some more accurate information on the different specifications of U.S. coins struck on foreign mints. There were dealers, off the top of my head, Natalie Halpern was probably the top woman Era collector, Era dealer at the time in New York. A name, Milt Cohen, who was a collector that Sid mentioned earlier. There's a lot of names of people that exist in some of these publications up here that attended the Era-ramas 1967 through the early 70s that have unfortunately been pretty much forgotten, except in some of the pictures from the coin shows. But they were very influential on me and a lot of the people here today that got into Era coins because of them, because of the things that they did. So the hobby has really changed over the decades with the amount of information that's available, with the certification, with the internet especially. I mean, in the past, if you wanted to see Era coins, you hoped that if you went to a major coin show like the ANA, there'd be a half a dozen dealers maybe that had some really good Era coins to look at. But with the internet today, you can sit at home, and whether it's on eBay or going to some website, you can pull up incredible full color, large pictures of double strikes, off centers, off metals, whatever the heck you want. And obviously in die varieties too, and the die varieties look more spectacular, blown up and in color. And so there's collectors all over the country that look for these things.
Just, don't mean to interrupt.
No, Sid.
But Alan, I was looking through here and I remember seeing the picture. I don't remember which book it was in, but a picture of you presenting me with the trophy at one of the Aeroramas for the Best of Show exhibit. I don't remember which one it was in, but thank you again today. It's probably been 35 years ago at least, if not 40 years ago. And it could have been a long time ago. Anyway, one more thing. Was mentioned about these clips and the study on the clips with that effect. And what was his name?
Blakesley.
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 He came blank. Blakesley would always be at one of the shows, well, a few of the shows down in Southern California at the Aerorama. He was always sitting over on the side, and no one hardly was talking with him, but I, for some reason or other, I always had to talk to him, and he would be examining a clip. He had a mask over his mouth, covering his nose too, and the cotton gloves. And he says, you know, Sid, I don't own any coins. I don't own any coins. Maybe some of you remember that.
Yeah.
He said he didn't own any coins, but he examined these clips. And he wrote articles, a real study on those articles, drew diagrams and so forth. But he was great, and he sent me a lot of pictures. If any of you were at any of those Aeroramas and were at the 1970 Aerorama, he sent me 100 and some pictures, and he listed he numbered every picture, and then the people in the picture he also numbered with this catalog saying who that person was that he had numbered. So if you were there and you want to see those pictures, I have them with me here today. When this is over, you can take a look at them if you care to.
And if the room is booked for the next thing,
it is?
everybody
Okay.
welcome to come to my table, and Sid will show the pictures.
But I don't think anybody ever knew Blakesley's first name, did
No.
No, never did. I talked to him all the time. He never did say his first name, but he was always there with those gloves and a mask.
You know, I think it was actually John, because he sent in a check for his renewal once, and it had a name, and then I put it into the computer database, and he sent a scathing letter. Oh, man. The nastiest letter I'd ever gotten. He says, don't call me Mr. and don't call me John.
Call me
It's just plain
Blakesley.
old Blakesley.
Yeah.
The Madonna of the coin business.
Anyway, actually in this room, and I'm a member of Connecta, and I'm not an air collector, but if you actually think about it, right now in this room, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, possibly 6 the leaders and the pioneers in the hobby. Yeah, we're going to get all group picture. Mr. Pisa, you forgot, I invited you over 20 years ago to speak in San Francisco, if you remember. Lee Gong.
I have trouble remembering
Come on, let's
that.
get a group picture up here. Sam, you're in this group, come on. Here, I'll take the, you're not going to ever get an assemblage like that.
Glad to see you.
You got to find that picture. You showed it to me yesterday.
Yeah, I
He's
don't
got- he's
remember
got
which
it.
one it was in.
It's in one of these.
Yeah, it's in one of
covers.
these.
Any other?
Can you get us all?
Okay. Alan, can you step back because you're covering up Zan? He's, you know.
Enjoy my life.
Okay, gentlemen, face me.
They caught 2 of them.
Surprised I haven't heard that joke sooner this week.
Thank you.
We're all
Okay, I got to tell you one.
Michael, thank you for that introduction.
Wait a minute, Sid's got one more story.
One more story.
Come on.
Okay. It's been many years ago when he came to Stockton, pay a visit to us. He happened to be in the Berkeley area with a cousin, wasn't it?
Actually, my cousin went to Berkeley at the time,
Okay,
yes.
all right. So they're out in the backyard. Wife and I are in the house. What the heck are they doing out there? So, being curious, I had to go out there and see, hey, what's going on out here? He says, look at that, blue sky. We never see that down in L.A.
You're right. You're right. Yeah, Sid's wife, Mary.
And my daughter, Marcia.
Anyway, gentlemen, it's meant a lot to me. I know we're rushed, but with your other Arab people here, and this is possibly never going to happen again, to Sid, to the gentleman you who started, we'd like to give you a little appreciation. Doesn't have an error on it, but take it with our token.
Thank you very much.
There you go.
For mine. And obviously, you know, I owe Sid a lot of thanks. As I said, he was one of the 3 people that I've always credited with getting me motivated to drop out of college and get into the coin business.
Well, I'll tell you one more thing. Most of my off-center 57D pennies came from Fred. They were inexpensive at that time. But then I had so many of them, I kept telling everybody, I have the world's largest accumulation of 1957D off-center cents. The world's largest accumulation.
He still has.
I still have them.
Not smart enough to buy them.
To buy them, exactly. Thank you all. And some of these pictures will be available for viewing at my table if anybody would like to ask any more questions. Thank you, guys.
Let's get you to just one final one.